down in the galley, you don't see the sky or the water. Your world is stainless steel, the hum of the refrigerators and the rhythmic clatter of pots and pans. That night, I was cleaning the grill, scrubbing away the grease from the crew's late dinner. The ship was moving with its familiar, gentle sway, the vibration of the engines a steady presence under the soles of my boots. It's a lonely job, but a predictable one. I was thinking about my daughter's upcoming birthday, planning what I'd buy her with my bonus when we made port in Sri Lanka. The ship was my office and my home, a noisy, smelly, but ultimately safe metal island. I felt secure, cocooned deep within its steel guts, completely disconnected from the dark, silent world we were sailing through. The noise of my scraper on the hot metal grill was the loudest thing in my universe. The concerns of the captain, the pilot, the course we were on, none of it mattered down here. My world was small, contained, and I believed completely safe from harm. The first thing that went wrong was the sound. The deep, constant hum of the ship's machinery just stopped. It wasn't a gradual power down, it was like someone had flipped a switch, killing everything at once. The refrigerators went silent, the ventilation fans whirred to a stop, the overhead lights went out, plunging me into absolute, suffocating blackness. For a moment I stood frozen, my scraper still in my hand. The silence was wrong. It was a physical presence, heavy and unnatural. On a ship this size, it's never truly silent. The absence of that constant vibration was more alarming than any alarm bell. I called out, "Hey, what's going on?" But my voice was swallowed by the dead air. I was alone, in the dark, in the belly of a dead machine. A primal fear, the kind you feel when you wake up in a strange room and don't know where you are, started to creep up my spine. The floor beneath my feet felt unnervingly still. We weren't moving. We were just floating. Before I could even process the silence, the ship lurched violently. It wasn't the roll of a wave. It was a sickening sideways shove that threw me off my feet. I crashed into a prep counter, my head striking the steel edge with a sickening crack. A cascade of pots and pans stored on overhead racks came crashing down around me in the darkness, a chaotic metallic hailstorm. I scrambled on the floor, disoriented, my head throbbing. The ship felt wrong. It was listing, tilting. My stomach churned with vertigo and fear. My mind raced through the possibilities. Did we hit something? A reef? Another vessel? An explosion in the engine room? The not knowing was the worst part. Down here, blind and isolated, my imagination conjured every possible horror. I was trapped in a sensory deprivation tank that was actively trying to kill me, the darkness filled only with the sound of my own panicked breathing and the groans of the ship around me. Then came the sound. It wasn't from our ship. It felt like it came from the core of the earth. It was a low, grinding roar that vibrated through the steel hull and into my bones, a deep, foundational noise of utter destruction. It was the sound of something immense being broken. It went on for what felt like an eternity, a sustained, agonizing groan of unimaginable stress. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it was useless. The sound was inside me. I was convinced the hull had been breached, that we had run aground and the ship was being torn apart on rocks. I could feel the vibrations changing, the deep grinding joined by a high-pitched shriek of tearing metal. I pictured the cold, black water of the harbor rushing in, filling these tight corridors, trapping me in a watery grave. I screamed, but the sound of the world ending outside was far louder than any noise I could make. I was an insect, trapped inside a can that was being crushed by a giant. Just as the grinding noise began to subside, there was a secondary impact, a cataclysmic crash from directly above. The entire ceiling of the galley bowed downwards with a deafening boom. Dust and debris rained down, and a thick pipe overhead burst, spewing scalding steam into the blackness. The air became hot and wet, smelling of rust and river water. That was it. I knew we were done for. Something had fallen on us. The bridge, I thought. Maybe a crane from the port had collapsed. My only thought was escape,
I crawled on my hands and knees, a blind animal driven by pure survival instinct. The floor was slick with grease and water, and my hands were sliced open by fallen debris I couldn't see. I scrambled toward where I thought the door was, choking on the dust, my skin blistering from the steam, guided only by a frantic, desperate memory of the galley's layout. Every groaning plate of steel was the ship's final death rattle before it sank. I finally found the doorway and stumbled into a narrow passageway. The red emergency lights were flickering, casting the corridor in a hellish, strobing light. Other crewmen were emerging from their quarters, their faces masks of terror and confusion. No one knew what had happened. The air was thick and gray. We staggered like zombies toward a ladder leading to the main deck. When I finally climbed out into the open air, I looked up and my mind just refused to understand what I was seeing. The Francis Scott Key Bridge was just gone. A mangled stump of steel was all that remained on the other side, and our own bow was a tangled mess of girders and concrete. The sky was empty where an iconic structure had been just minutes ago. The scale of the destruction was impossible to comprehend. I wasn't on a sinking ship. I was at ground zero of an apocalypse. I stood there, covered in filth and blood, and just stared into the void we had created. They tried to make me go back to work in a kitchen on land. I lasted 1 day. The first time a chef dropped a heavy pot, the sound sent me into a full-blown panic attack. I was on the floor, under a table, hyperventilating, right back in that dark, shaking galley. The sound of metal on metal is a trigger that detonates my sanity. That's what buried me. Not a hospital, but the memory of that sound. I live in a small, quiet apartment now. I wear noise-canceling headphones most of the day. I'm terrified of basements, of elevators, of any enclosed space where I can't see the sky. People talk about the visual horror of the bridge falling, but they don't understand. I never saw it fall. I heard it. I felt it. I was buried inside the weapon, and some part of me never climbed out of that dark, screaming steel tomb. I'm still there, waiting for the water to rush in.
My world was the engine room, a place of comforting, predictable noise. The deep, rhythmic thrum of the main diesel was the ship's heartbeat, a constant I had known for 20 years. It was a language I understood better than my own native tongue. I knew every cough, every sputter, every slight change in pitch. That night, leaving the port of Baltimore, the engine sang its usual song of power and purpose. The air was thick with the familiar metallic smell of hot oil and diesel exhaust, a scent that meant we were underway, that everything was normal. I was on my rounds, checking the gauges, my hand resting on the warm steel of a cylinder housing, feeling the immense power vibrating through my bones. We were a giant, unstoppable force, pushing out into the Chesapeake Bay under a clear, star-filled sky. The lights of the bridge were a distant, beautiful necklace draped across the darkness ahead. It was just another departure, another job, another night in a life defined by the steady pulse of the machine beneath my feet. A life I thought I had complete control over. The first sign of trouble wasn't a bang or a crash, but a subtle betrayal, a flicker. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed and dimmed for a split second, an electrical hiccup that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Then the engine coughed. It wasn't loud, just a momentary stutter in its perfect rhythm, a cardiac arrhythmia in the heart of the ship. My blood ran cold. I yelled to my assistant, my voice tight, and we lunged for the control panel. The gauges were going haywire. The main generator output was plummeting, the needles dancing erratically before dropping like stones. A klaxon alarm began to shriek, a high-pitched, piercing sound that sliced through the engine's roar. It was the sound of catastrophic failure, a mechanical scream of death. We were losing all power, not just auxiliary, but main propulsion. The deep thrum I had lived by for 2 decades was fading, replaced by the terrifying, high-pitched whine of dying turbines and the frantic shouts of my crew. The giant was having a seizure, and we were trapped inside its convulsing body. Then came the silence.
The most absolute and terrifying silence I have ever known. The engine died completely. The vibrations stopped. For a moment, the only sound was the fading echo of the alarms and our own ragged breathing in the sudden, oppressive darkness. The emergency generator kicked in with a weak, sputtering cough, casting long, dancing shadows across the engine room and powering a few dim red emergency lights. The ship, once a living, breathing creature of immense power, was now just a dead piece of steel, a 10,000-ton coffin drifting on the cold, black water. We were powerless, adrift. I could feel the ship's momentum, the unstoppable inertia carrying us forward, but we had no steering, no way to slow down, no control whatsoever. It was the ultimate nightmare for an engineer, to be surrounded by machinery that you can no longer command. The feeling of helplessness was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, stealing the air from my lungs. We were blind and mute, hurtling towards something in the dark. A crackle came over the intercom, a panicked voice from the bridge, shouting in broken English, "Bridge! Dead ahead! Key bridge!" The words didn't fully register at first, but then the cold, mathematical reality crashed down on me. I knew our speed. I knew our weight. I knew exactly where we were in the channel. I didn't need to see the bridge. I could visualize the physics of what was about to happen. It was like watching a complex equation solve itself in my mind, and the answer was death. My crew and I worked with a frantic, desperate energy, trying to bypass the failed circuits, trying to force a manual restart, our hands flying across cold steel control surfaces that were now completely unresponsive. We could hear the anchor chain rattling from the deck above, a futile, desperate sound like a man trying to stop a freight train with a fishing line. The smell of burning electrical insulation filled the air, the acrid scent of our own failure. We were out of time. The ship was a missile, and the target was just seconds away. The impact wasn't a sound. It was a physical event that traveled through the deck plates and up my spine. It was a deep, guttural groan, the sound of a mountain being torn in half. The entire ship shuddered violently, throwing us against the machinery like rag dolls. I was slammed into a bulkhead, the steel plate ringing like a bell against my skull. The lights flickered and died for good. Then came the noise from above. It was a symphony of destruction, a cacophony of screeching, tearing steel and shattering concrete that went on and on. It sounded like the sky itself was being ripped apart. The ship listed hard to port, and I could hear the roar of water, the terrifying sound of the Patapsco River claiming what had fallen. We were in total darkness, a tomb of steel filled with the screams of injured men and the horrifying, ongoing sounds of a world coming to an end just a few hundred feet above our heads. I curled into a ball on the floor, my hands over my head, convinced the wreckage was going to crush through the deck and obliterate us all. In the immediate aftermath, there was only darkness, the smell of river water and the taste of concrete dust. The air was so thick you could chew on it. Emergency lights flickered back on, revealing a scene of utter chaos. Pipes had burst, spraying the room with hot steam and diesel fuel. Men were injured, crying out in pain and fear. The ship felt wrong, unnaturally still and heavy at the bow, groaning under a weight it was never designed to bear. We didn't know the extent of the damage, only that we had survived the initial event. The fear didn't subside, it mutated. Was the hull breached? Were we sinking? Every creak of the stressed metal, every groan of the hull was a sign that our tomb was about to become our watery grave. We were trapped in the belly of the beast that had just destroyed a landmark and killed innocent people. We were alive, but we were entombed in our own failure, waiting for the river to pull us down into the cold, dark silence forever. They say I was rescued, but that's not true. They pulled my body from the ship, but my mind is still in that engine room, trapped in the moment the heartbeat stopped. They had to put me away, you see, buried me in a quiet, sterile room in a hospital upstate, because the world is too loud now. Any sudden noise, a car backfiring, a dish falling, even a door slamming, sends me right back to the impact. I hear the shriek of twisting steel. I feel the deck shudder beneath my feet. I can't be in the dark. I see the emergency lights flickering on the faces of terrified men. They give me pills to quiet the noise, but they can't erase the memory of that silence. That awful, profound silence when the engines died. That's the real horror. It wasn't the crash that broke me. It was the 2 minutes of absolute helplessness before it. My life's work was to control the machine, and it betrayed me. Now I am the broken machine. I am buried here, listening to the phantom echo of a dying engine, forever adrift.
It was a beautiful night to be on the bridge. The lights of Baltimore receded behind us, a glittering shoreline against the black velvet of the sky. Ahead, the Francis Scott Key Bridge spanned the channel, its arching lights a familiar and welcoming gateway to the sea. The air was cool and clean. The pilot had the con, his voice calm and steady as he gave minor course corrections. I stood my watch, monitoring the radar, the GPS, the steady progress of our massive vessel. There was a quiet professionalism in the dimly lit wheelhouse, a sense of order and control. The ship moved with a grace that defied its immense size, responding perfectly to every command. We were masters of this steel behemoth. Looking at the bridge, lit up and majestic, I felt a sense of pride. It was a monument of engineering, and we were guiding our own feat of engineering right under it. A routine passage we'd done 100 times before. It was a perfect, ordinary, forgettable moment. I wish, with every fiber of my being, that it had stayed that way, lost to the fog of countless other uneventful nights at sea. The first flicker of the lights was a minor annoyance. Then the entire console in front of me went dark. The radar screen vanished. The GPS blinked out. The ship's electronic heart monitor had just flatlined. A collective gasp went through the wheelhouse. The captain started barking orders, his voice suddenly sharp with an edge of something I'd never heard before: fear. The pilot was shouting into his radio, his calm demeanor shattered. I grabbed the wheel. It was dead. The rudder indicator showed it was stuck hard to port. The engine telegraph was useless. We were no longer piloting a ship. We were passengers on a 10,000-ton battering ram. Outside the windows, the view remained serene, but inside our control room, the world had ended. The silence was the worst part. The low hum of the electronics, the ventilation, the very pulse of the ship's nervous system. It was all gone. We were in a ghost ship, drifting silently and inexorably toward the beautifully lit monument that was about to become a tombstone. Mayday! Mayday! All powers lost! We have lost control! The pilot's voice was a desperate plea broadcast to the uncaring night. He was trying to warn the bridge, to stop traffic, to alert anyone who could listen that a catastrophe was imminent. My eyes were glued to the forward windows. The bridge support pillar, a massive concrete column, was no longer a distant part of the scenery. It was growing, swelling in our view with an alarming speed. It looked like a concrete giant standing in our path, daring us to hit it. I could make out the individual lights along the span, could even see the tiny, moving headlights of cars crossing over, their occupants completely oblivious to the unguided missile that was aiming directly for the foundation of their world. There was a frantic, primal urge to scream, to turn a wheel that wouldn't budge, to do something, but there was nothing to do. We were watching our own doom unfold in real time, a slow-motion disaster that we had orchestrated, yet were completely powerless to prevent. The order came to drop the port anchor. It was a last, desperate gamble, a Hail Mary against the laws of physics. I heard the thunderous rattle of the anchor chain paying out, a sound of furious, futile resistance. The ship barely seemed to notice. The pillar was everything now.
It filled the entire view, a mountain of concrete and steel. I could see the texture of it, the way the lights reflected off its surface. Time seemed to stretch and warp. I saw a truck driving on the span directly above the pillar. I wondered about the driver. Was he listening to the radio? Thinking about his family? Did he have any idea that his life was about to be extinguished in a cascade of fire and steel? I gripped the useless helm, my knuckles white, and braced myself. There was a strange sense of resignation. The world narrowed to that single point of impact, the moment when our failure would become a permanent scar on the landscape and in the lives of so many people. The final second felt like a lifetime of regret. The sound of the impact was a dull, bone-jarring thud that vibrated through my teeth. But the sight was the true horror. I watched the concrete pillar disintegrate. It didn't just break, it shattered into a cloud of dust and debris, as if it were made of chalk. For a surreal moment, the bridge above hung in the air, seemingly unsupported. Then it began to fail. It didn't fall, it unraveled. The massive steel truss sagged, twisted, and then tore apart with a sound so loud it felt like it was ripping the air itself. It was a scream of tortured metal on a scale I cannot describe. The lights on the span went out in sections as the structure came apart, plunging into the river. I watched the headlights of the cars, those little points of human life, vanish one by one into the black water. It was an orderly, silent, and complete erasure. The entire event, from impact to the final splash, took less than 30 seconds. 30 seconds to erase a landmark. 30 seconds to end lives. 30 seconds to destroy my soul. When the final section of the bridge crashed into the water, a wave of displaced river water washed over our bar, followed by a thick cloud of concrete dust that blotted out the stars. The air filled with the smell of pulverized rock and something else, something acrid and burnt. Our bow was a scrapyard of twisted steel and debris. The proud, majestic bridge was gone. In its place was just a jagged ruin, a broken tooth sticking out of the water. The silence that fell was more profound and terrifying than the collapse itself. There were no more screams of metal, no more roaring water, just the gentle lapping of the river against our hull and the distant sound of sirens beginning their mournful wail. I fell to my knees on the deck of the wheelhouse, unable to breathe, unable to process the absolute devastation I had just witnessed. I hadn't just seen an accident. I had seen the world end for those people. I'm the one they talk to. The investigators, the lawyers, the therapists. They want to know what I saw. So I tell them. I describe the lights going out. I describe the pillar getting larger. And I describe the headlights. I always come back to the headlights. I close my eyes to sleep, and I see them, tiny points of light, driving calmly to their doom before winking out into nothing. They buried me in paperwork and testimonies, but the real burial is in my own mind. I can't look at a bridge without my heart pounding in my chest. I can't be on a boat. The sight of a skyline at night makes me physically ill. They tell me it's PTSD, a predictable response to trauma. But it's more than that. I was on the bridge of that ship. I was at the controls. It doesn't matter that they didn't work. I was the one who watched it happen, who saw the world end for those people. I'm not buried in a hospital. I'm buried in a 30-second loop of falling steel and disappearing lights.
I was down in the engine room that night, March 26, 2024, aboard the Dolly, a massive container ship lumbering toward the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. The air was thick with the hum of machinery, oil scents mixing with the salty harbor breeze seeping through vents. I'd been a marine engineer for 15 years, mostly on cargo hauls like this, from Singapore to the US. But something felt off from the start. We'd had flickering lights earlier, dismissed as minor glitches, but the captain had mentioned maintenance logs showing jury-rigged fixes on the electrical systems, cheap patches from the ship's owners to cut costs. As we approached the bridge around 1:27 a.m., the first blackout hit like a punch. Everything went dark. Engines stalled, lights out, alarms blaring, and a deafening chorus. My heart slammed against my ribs. I grabbed a flashlight, its beam cutting through the shadows like a knife. The ship was adrift. No propulsion, no steering, just 95,000 tons of steel hurtling toward disaster. I thought, this is it. We're going to smash into something, and I'll drown in this metal tomb. The fear clawed at me, visions of water rushing in, trapping me below decks. Colleagues shouted in Hindi and English, panic rising. We tried restarting the generators, but nothing. The second blackout sealed our fate. The bridge loomed ahead, its lights mocking us. The impact was apocalyptic. A shudder ran through the hull as we struck the support pillar, the sound like thunder cracking the world open. Metal screamed, containers shifted with groans that echoed like dying beasts. I was thrown against a bulkhead, my head ringing, blood trickling from a cut. Up top, the bridge crumbled in seconds, trusses folding like paper, cars plunging into the Patasco River's icy depths. From below, it felt like the ship was being torn apart. I imagined the construction workers up there, pothole repair crew, screaming as the structure gave way. 6 of them died that night, swallowed by the water, but in that moment, I was sure we'd join them. The dolly listed slightly, water lapping higher against the hull. Alarms wailed non-stop, red emergency lights pulsing like a heartbeat in hell. I clambered up ladders, slipping on oil-slicked steps, convinced the ship would capsize. My mind raced with horror, trapped in a flooding compartment, lungs burning for air, darkness closing in. The causes haunted me even then. Negligent owners, skimping on repairs, faulty fuel pumps causing the power loss, as later investigations revealed. But right there, it was raw terror, the ship's bowels feeling like a grave. I prayed to any god listening, but only silence answered amid the chaos. After the crash, we huddled on deck, staring at the wreckage. The bridge's remnants jutted from the river like broken bones, spotlights from rescue boats piercing the night. Mayday calls had gone out just in time to stop traffic, but those poor workers, their screams, real or imagined, echoed in my ears. I felt the ship's vibrations still, as if it were alive and angry. The crew, all 21 of us, Indians plus the pilots, were accounted for. No deaths, just my minor injury and bruises. But the psychological blow was immediate. I couldn't stop shaking, visions of the collapse replaying, the pillar buckling, debris raining down. We were stuck on board for weeks, FBI and NTSB swarming us, questioning us about the blackouts. The isolation gnawed at me. No phones initially, cut off from families back home. Nightmares started that first night, dreaming of drowning, the water black and cold, pulling me under. The causes were clear. Contaminated fuel clogging lines, leading to the power failures, as per the preliminary report. But knowing didn't help. It amplified the guilt. Why us? Why that night? The horror wasn't just the event, it was the helplessness, the brush with death that left invisible scars. Days blurred into a fog of interrogations and waiting. The ship was lodged against the debris, cranes hovering like vultures. I paced the decks, jumping at every creak, convinced another collapse was coming. Sleep evaded me. When it came, it brought terrors, reliving the impact, feeling the ship shudder as if possessed. Psychological trauma set in hard. Anxiety attacks where my chest tightened, breath short like drowning on dry land. Flashbacks hit randomly. The alarms, the crash, the river's hungry maw. We talked among ourselves, sharing fears, but it didn't ease the dread. The media painted us as villains, ignoring the corporate negligence behind the jury-rigged systems. One night, alone in my bunk, I heard whispers, like the dead workers calling from the water. Rational me knew it was wind, but terror gripped me. I thought I'd die from the stress, heart pounding wildly. The causes obsessed me, electrical vibrations from unbalanced propellers, as experts later said, but in my mind it was a curse. The event buried me alive in paranoia, every shadow a threat. Therapy sessions via video helped little. The horror was etched deep. By May, when they blasted the debris off us, I was a wreck. The controlled explosion rocked the ship and I cowered below, sure it was the end. Morale plummeted. Some crew wept openly, fearing jail for something beyond our control. My hands trembled constantly, appetite gone, weight dropping. Night after night, I'd wake screaming, dreaming of the bridge falling on me, crushing the life out. The psychological problems mounted, PTSD diagnosed by a shipboard counselor, but it felt like madness. I saw ghosts in the corridors, silhouettes of the lost workers, accusing eyes. Realistic? Maybe not, but trauma warps the mind. The causes were dissected in reports. Poor maintenance, inadequate training for blackouts, but blame didn't heal. I isolated myself, avoiding mirrors that showed a haunted man. The fear of death lingered, a constant companion, whispering that next time, luck would fail. Buried under the weight of it all, I contemplated ending it, the river calling like a siren. Survival felt like a curse, the event's shadow eternal. Finally, in June, some of us left the ship, but the trauma followed. Back in India, I couldn't function. Crowds terrified me. Loud noises sent me diving for cover. Doctors prescribed meds for anxiety, depression swallowing me whole. The horror story didn't end with the crash. It evolved into a living nightmare. I'd relive the power loss, the collision, thinking each time I'd die horribly. Family tried helping, but I pushed them away, buried in guilt for surviving when others didn't. Investigations revealed more causes, alarm fatigue from false warnings, delaying response. But facts couldn't exorcise the demons. Therapy dug deep, uncovering layers of fear, but progress was slow. I lost my job, unable to board another ship without panic. The event left me a shell, psychologically shattered, as if the bridge's collapse buried my soul under rubble. Nights blurred with days, insomnia fueling hallucinations of sinking ships. The scary part was, it was all real, no fiction, just the mind's betrayal after staring death in the face. A year later, in 2025, I'm still fighting. The psychological trauma buried me so deep, I had to be institutionalized for months. Therapists peeling back the horror layer by layer. I thought I'd die that night on the dolly, and in a way, part of me did. The causes, corporate greed, mechanical failures, haunt public records, but my personal hell is private. Flashbacks persist, the crashes roar echoing in quiet moments. I've joined support groups for maritime disasters, sharing stories that chill even hardened sailors. But the fear remains. What if it happens again? The bridge rebuilds, but I'm forever broken. Mentioning the burial, it's metaphorical. The trauma buried the old me, leaving a frightened ghost. If you ask, was it worth the seafaring life? No. That night turned adventure into terror, a real horror story etched in my psyche.